They didn't teach you to be honest. They taught you to be convenient. You were rewarded for being agreeable, for being soft, for knowing when to shut up to keep the peace. They called it maturity, respect, being easy to talk to. But here's the truth. You weren't raised to speak powerfully. You were trained to speak gently enough to not scare anyone, to phrase your truth so it doesn't offend, to hide your boundary so it doesn't shift the mood, to shape your tone so others don't have to face themselves. You thought that was kindness. It was training. Training to flinch when someone's upset. Training to over-explain. Training to shape your words around the fragility of other people. And over time, you didn't even notice you were editing yourself just to stay accepted. But cold mind doesn't bend for comfort. It holds for clarity. Because if your truth can't be spoken without walking on eggshells, you're not in a relationship. You're in emotional hostage mode. You weren't raised to speak powerfully. You were trained to speak gently enough to not scare anyone. Society rewards the soft, not the clear. From the beginning, you were praised not for being honest, but for being pleasant. You were told, "That's a good boy. She's so polite. He's easy to talk to." Translation? You don't make people uncomfortable. You know when to shrink. And every time you stayed quiet, every time you softened your truth, every time you apologized for simply being clear, they rewarded you with approval, with affection, with less tension. And your nervous system learned clarity equals danger, ease equals safety. So you shaped yourself into someone easy to digest, not too loud, not too blunt, not too inconvenient. And the result? You became emotionally accessible to people who never earned access, and emotionally edited in places where your truth was most needed. Society never taught you to speak truth. It taught you to manage harmony, to stabilize their nervous systems by destabilizing your own. That's not compassion. That's conditioning. You were never asked, "What's real for you?" Only, "Can you say it in a way that keeps everything smooth?" So you learned to shrink, to apologize when you didn't agree, to smile when something felt wrong, to keep the room comfortable, even when you weren't. But cold mind sees through it, because clarity isn't cruelty, and discomfort isn't danger. It's just the cost of not abandoning yourself. They didn't teach you to be real. They taught you to keep the room calm, even if it meant setting yourself on fire. You're not living by values. You're reacting to their feelings. You think you're being thoughtful, empathetic, mature. But look closer. You're not acting from your values. You're reacting to their discomfort. They frown. You soften. They go silent. You explain. They look uneasy. You rush to adjust. Not because you were wrong, but because you can't stand being the source of someone else's tension. That's not compassion. That's conditioning. You were taught to manage feelings that don't belong to you, to preempt disconnection by over-accommodating. From an early age, you learned how to keep the peace, to sense conflict before it forms, to regulate others by shrinking yourself. And every time you did, you were praised. So polite, so respectful, such an easy person to be around. But cold mind sees it for what it is: emotional scanning, self-erasure, a loop where you abandon yourself to preserve comfort for others. You call it empathy. But it's reaction. And reaction isn't power. It's emotional compliance. You don't lead with values. You lead with fear-based calibration. And every time you edit your truth to make someone else feel better, you teach your nervous system: their peace, my integrity. The longer that loop runs, the less you recognize yourself. Because you've built your identity on how safe other people feel around you, not on what you actually believe. And eventually, you lose track of the difference. But here's the shift. Discomfort isn't disconnection. It's just the side effect of not abandoning yourself anymore. The people who truly see you won't flinch when you stop adjusting. They'll respect the stillness because it's finally yours. You weren't born to be easy to handle. You were born to be clear. Three cold principles to stop serving. Their comfort and start serving your clarity. You were taught to ease tension, to regulate the room, to keep everyone comfortable, even if it cost you yourself. Cold mind breaks that script. Here's how. 1. Their discomfort is not your emergency. You've been trained to panic the moment someone else gets tense. They frown. You soften. They withdraw. You chase. They're disappointed. You overcompensate. But their nervous system is not your battlefield. You don't exist to prevent their discomfort. You exist to stay aligned with your clarity. And clarity isn't always comfortable, but it's always clean. 2. You don't manage their feelings. You were not born to be an emotional airbag, yet you've taken on the role. Soften the edge, catch the blow, absorb the weight, so they feel okay again. But here's the truth. If you keep rescuing people from the emotional consequences of reality, they'll never grow, and you'll never be free. Let them sit with their discomfort. You're not being unkind, you're being real. 3. Clarity cruelty. You've been made to believe that being clear is being harsh, that standing your ground is being cold. But directness isn't disrespect. It's actually the highest form of respect, because it honors the truth without manipulation. You don't need to yell. You don't need to explain 10 times. You don't need to sugarcoat reality so no one flinches. Say what you mean. Hold what you said. Watch what adjusts. It's not cruelty. It's internal precision. The shift happens when you stop editing yourself just to make people feel safe around you, and start building a system where you feel safe inside yourself. You weren't born to manage the room. You were born to anchor it. She didn't soothe the room. She stabilized it. It was subtle, but real. The tension rose. Someone disagreed. Voices shifted. All eyes moved toward her, expecting her to fix it, to say something gentle, to bring the mood back down. Because that's who she used to be. The peacemaker, the translator, the emotional glue. She felt the urge, the old code, the reflex to smooth, soften, settle. But this time, she paused. She felt the pressure, the pull to rescue, the expectation to say, "It's okay, let's not fight." And she didn't move. No reaction. No rush to edit herself. No attempt to patch their discomfort. She just breathed, stayed centered, held her posture, held the line. And in that stillness, something happened. The room started adjusting to her, not because she took control, but because she didn't give it away. They tried to bait her into making it easier, into being the one who makes everyone feel safe again. But her silence wasn't distance, it was structure. And slowly, the tone dropped. The emotional spikes settled. People began recalibrating, not around comfort, but around clarity. She didn't soothe. She didn't rescue. She simply refused to leave herself to keep others regulated. And that refusal? It restructured the entire interaction. Because she didn't diffuse the moment. She absorbed and restructured it, until the moment bent around her. That's cold mind. You don't need to calm the storm. You just need to stop leaving your center every time thunder hits. You don't keep the room together by softening. You keep it together by refusing to disappear. Final message. You weren't born to regulate the room. You were built to hold the frame. You don't have to rescue the room. You don't have to rescue their reactions. You don't have to rescue their discomfort every time the energy shifts. You were trained to. But that training ends here. Because every time you bend your truth to keep things smooth, you fracture your alignment. Every time you soften your clarity so someone else feels okay, you teach your nervous system that you come second. And over time, second becomes default. Comfort becomes duty. And you forget what it's like to speak without a filter made for other people's emotions. But cold mind doesn't ask for approval. It asks for structure. And structure doesn't flinch. It doesn't collapse into diplomacy. It doesn't trade power for temporary harmony. It holds. Because real leadership isn't about making everyone feel okay. It's about showing them what stillness under pressure looks like. Stillness isn't silence. It's the sharpest form of presence. In the next video, we'll expose the fragile manipulator, how people use weakness as a weapon, and why cold mind never bends to emotional guilt disguised as vulnerability. Subscribe. Don't regulate the room. Stabilize yourself.